Hi everyone, it's Evelyn, and in this week's video we're going to discuss flowers that I'm absolutely not growing this year for a variety of different reasons. Now I'm going to just do this alphabetically, so there's no this is the worst, this is the best, this one grows in this season, this one grows in that season. It's just going to be alphabetically. So the first one we're going to start with is anemones. Now that's controversial for a lot of cut flower farmers because a lot of cut flower farmers really like the anemones. It's a nice early bloom and it puts a little brilliance of color into bouquets, etc. But the thing is, for me, I didn't find they really added anything to my bouquets, and they took up a lot of space in my garden. So for me, they're just not making the list. Now that said, an anemone on its own as a little grouping of flowers looks really cute, as you can see here in this tiny little watering can with some anemones in it, a coral bells flower as well, and some astilbe leaves. It's really cute, and that's sold right away. But that's not a reason to grow anemones. I'm growing flowers that I can use in bouquets. The fact that I can also use them in small jar arrangements or small vase arrangements is great. But if I don't like them in my bouquets, they're just not going to make the list for this year. Having said that, because I was pretty sure I wasn't going to grow them this year, I didn't even bother digging them up. And we do have a very wet climate in our winters. So they stayed in the ground. If they come up this spring, I'll probably let them grow. They're going to be in the bed that I'm growing all my lettuce in. So if they poke up amongst my lettuce plants, I think I'm okay with that. But I'm not putting I didn't put any effort into digging up the corms. I'm certainly not buying any additional corms. And if they come up, great. If they don't, great. But as far as making my cut flower arrangements bouquets go, no, they're a no for me. Now, next up on my list of what cut flower I'm not going to grow this year is the classic series of Bachelor buttons. Excuse me. Now you'll know that in one of my previous videos when I discussed the seeds that I'm going to be planting starting February 1st, so that would be the seed schedule, which is part 2 of the 3-part series of what to do before you ever plant seeds. I am growing Bachelor buttons, but I'm growing the black button Bachelor buttons only, which is a super dark purple. The classic series ranges in color from a very pale, almost white, to a very dark, either blue, red, or purple. There's 3 different ones in the series. For the purpose of this video, I only put 2 up. And the dark colors were very, very few and far in between. It was mostly all the light colors. And I just wasn't a particular fan of them. I used them because I had them, and I've only got so much space for growing flowers, so what bloomed I used. But this year, I am not planting the classic series because I would prefer to put that space to something else. And what I'm going to do is grow only the black button, which we discussed in the seed schedule earlier on this month. Now, third on my list are cactus dahlias. As much as I'm known as the dahlia lady in Campbell River, here where I live, and as much as I use a lot of dahlias in my bouquets once it's dahlia season, I can't use the cactus dahlias. Sadly, I mean, they're really pretty with their little, the texture that they give with their spiky petals is great amongst all the other more informal, larger petaled flowers that I grow. But the cactus variety, I guess because the petals are very, very thin, they lose their moisture content pretty quickly, and they don't do well as a cut flower on a hot day. So all the cactus dahlias that I had in my garden last year and the previous years will get potted up and grown to a certain stage and then sold. They look beautiful in the garden. But for my purposes as a cut flower grower, they are taking up space that I don't want them to take up space. I have better things to plant where they were. So sadly, as much as I really like them, and this is at the top, that's Star Princess, and below it is Snow Princess. They're beautiful. I love them, but again, they're taking up space that I can otherwise use for something else that is more valuable for me in my cut flower bouquets. So after the dahlias, here's another controversial one. You'll hear every cut flower farmer talk about how much they love Feverfew. Well, I thought, when I heard this, I thought, great, Feverfew grows like a weed in my property. It just pops up everywhere. It's almost as bad as dandelions. It's so weedy. So I let quite a bit of it grow so that I could use it in bouquets. Well, what didn't occur to me is that it's probably also really weedy in everybody else's yard. So when they see it in a bouquet, they just see weed. And the bouquets that had the feverfew in them just didn't sell. Well, if they're not going to sell, I'm not going to grow them. So I'm going to be going back to pulling up all the little baby plants and composting them when they start popping up. And they will pop up because they just are very, very weedy. They just prolific. I'll let some bloom if they're in an out of the way spot, but for the most part, they're going to come up. So next on my list of cut flowers that I'm not going to grow again is globe thistle. And I'm kind of sad about this one. I love globe thistle. It's just beautiful. It's beautiful in the garden. It's beautiful in a bouquet. The problem is it's got little spikes all over it. And the amount of time it took to de-spike it before I could put it in a bouquet was too labor intensive. I don't want to have a flower that requires too much time. So sadly, and it's really sadly because I do love the globe thistle, that's not going to be grown in my garden this year. Now what you see next to it, those really pale silvery blue foliage, that's not the globe thistle, that's actually lavender, which will continue growing in my garden. It's growing in a shady spot, so those lavender stems grow really tall, so I can use them in quite a bit of arrangements just by letting the stem grow quite long. I mean, they don't grow 24 inches tall, but they certainly grow 15, 16 inches tall, so and it doesn't even really matter if they hit the water or not because they will dry exactly as they look there. So I can put them in the bouquet up high and not worry about them hitting the water down below. Treat them like a dried flower that way. But yeah, so sadly, globe thistle's off the list for me this year. The other sad one that I'm going to be saying goodbye to this year is Japanese anemone. It's another flower that I absolutely love. It grows in the same area as the globe thistle, and they both bloom in the fall, so they're very colorful in the fall. I love them. But Japanese anemones, I read that they had good vase life. So based on that, I let it all grow. The reality is they do not have good vase life. I mean, I was lucky to get 3 or 4 days out of them, and yeah, so they're taking up space that I can otherwise plant with something else. And what I am going to plant where the globe thistle and the Japanese anemone were last year is a lot more cosmos because I love the foliage of cosmos. So I want to be able to plant a lot more of that. I'm only growing the double click varieties of cosmos because that flower is nicer than the single petaled ones, but I'm not actually growing it for the flower, and we'll probably pick off all the flower heads. So I'm not quite sure why I decided to go for that slightly more expensive seed in that regard, but I did. Next on my list of cut flowers that I'm absolutely not growing again this year is Shasta daisies. Now, Shasta daisies and Feverfew look a lot the same. The difference is the Feverfew blossom heads are quite small, whereas the Shasta daisy heads are, of course, quite a bit bigger. And they are really pretty, but they also grow like weeds around here. So it's another one of those things where people look at it and go, you picked some field flowers, because I could have, because they grow along the sides of the roads, etc. So it devalues my bouquets again. So Shasta daisies are out. However, this year I am growing the full-headed Shasta daisy. So instead of 1 or 2 rings of petals, it's a full head. So we'll see how that works. And that's not a field flower. That's more of a specialized daisy. So hopefully that will be a nice replacement for the Shasta daisy that is not making the cut this year for me. After that, we hit Strawflowers, another controversial one for flower farmers. Now, a lot of flower farmers grow Strawflowers simply for the dried flower arrangements that they do in the fall. Some of them will put them in bouquets fresh. They have a real cool kind of crunchy, papery sound to them when you play around with the petals, and they feel quite dry even when they're fresh. But honestly, they didn't make enough of an impression in a bouquet to be a good one for fresh bouquets. And while I did do some dried bouquets this fall, and because I was doing a Christmas event, I had to have enough dried bouquets that as they sold, there was enough to replace them with, so that I didn't actually sell out because I had enough to get me through the selling part. And then I thought I was going to store. Well, what I did is I'm storing them all for the winter so that I can make them available in the early spring before I have bouquets ready as well. So for instance, when I have my daffodil and my tulip pots out in the beginning of the season, sometime in April, if it's a sunny day, I can put out some dried flower arrangements too and hopefully sell those until they're all gone. But the problem is storing them is just such a pain that I don't think that I want to do that next year. I probably will do some, but not very many. It's just so hard to store them. They take up so much space, valuable space, that I would much prefer storing other stuff in. And the other thing is when you do a dried flower arrangement, such as in this one, so I have some yellow straw flowers down around the base of the arrangement. I have some red ones around the top, and then I have other dried flowers sort of through the center. I could eliminate the straw flowers and still have a nice dried flower arrangement. So to put aside space in my flower beds for straw flowers seems kind of pointless when I can dry some of my other flowers that I'm doing for fresh bouquets, and if the fresh bouquet doesn't sell, I can simply dry those ones. So that's one of the reasons that straw flowers is not making my list of flowers that I'm going to grow again this year. Next on my list is another controversial one. It's zinnias, and in this particular case, Bennery's giant zinnias. You will hear cut flower farmers all across the globe raving about Bennery's giant zinnias because they have a nice 4-inch bloom on them. Well, they also bloom at the same time as my dahlias, and I have 150 plus dahlias growing with all sorts of colors, all sorts of petal structures, and very full-headed. So when the Bennery's giant zinnias come online, they're not adding anything that I don't already have via my dahlias, except that the Bennery's giant flowers are smaller, and they're supposed to be a focal flower. So the reality is they don't do anything for my bouquets. There's other things that would do better to create a beautiful bouquet than the Bennery's giant zinnias. So again, sadly, as much as they are a very popular cut flower amongst cut flower growers, they're not going to make the cut for me this year. And speaking of that, the Queen Lime series, you can see how much, this is also a zinnia. It comes in lime, red, orange, peach, and I think there's a new color coming out this year that I've forgotten. And if you look at this photo here with my hand sort of holding 3 of the blossoms, you see they're quite small. They're beautiful, but they're quite small. And they get lost because, again, they're only adding interesting color to the bouquet. And at the time that they're blooming, that's not what I need. I have lots of interesting color via my dahlias, and they're not all dinner plates. I do a lot of ball dahlias, which are quite a bit smaller, like a 2-inch head. I also have my sunflowers, which at this time I've reduced in size based on the distance I plant them apart so that they don't complete with the bigger dahlias. And as you saw in my last week's video, the top 10 cut flowers that I am growing this year, that I have 8 different looks of the sunflower for colors. Well, I actually have 9. I didn't put my full-headed sunflower on that list because it was full-headed. And because of the sunflowers and because of the dahlias, these Queen Lime series zinnias didn't add anything to my bouquets either. So unfortunately, they're not making the cut either. Now, you kind of have to be ruthless with this because if they're not adding anything of value to the bouquets, then don't grow them. But that doesn't mean you're going to reduce the amount of things that you are growing, because the spaces that they were taking are now going to be taken up this year by Nigella, by stock, by a African marigold that has sort of a very, very pale buttery yellow 4-inch bloom. And there might be a few other things in there that I might decide to put in there along the way. But basically those things are replacing the ones that I'm not growing. Oh yeah, and of course I'm growing a lot more Cosmo this year because I love that feathery foliage. I will also be adding in the full-headed Shasta daisies that I bought as perennials last year, but didn't really have much in the way of blooms. I will be increasing my Russian sage stock. While I have lots of Astilbe, only one plant of it was white, so I will be increasing my white Astilbe stock. So all these things that are leaving my cut flower beds are simply getting replaced with other flowers that I think will be more valuable to me. And that's why it's really easy to be ruthless, because take one thing away, replace it with another that you're looking much more forward to. So that's my flowers that I won't be growing again this week. And I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please give me a thumbs up. Subscribe to my channel so that you don't miss any of my upcoming videos. I haven't quite decided what I'm going to focus on next week. It might be all the seeds that I'm growing, because again, when I went through the seed schedule, I only went through the seeds that I was going to be starting at the beginning of February. So I might do a seed video, but I might do something else. I haven't quite decided. You'll have to stay tuned to see what that is. Until next week, again, I hope you liked it. Bye. Oh, and don't forget to leave me any comments. If you have any cut flowers that you're not growing again this year, let me know what they are and why. I'd really like to know, because it's all a learning experience for all of us, including myself. So with that in mind, leave the comment, like, subscribe, and see you next week. Bye.